S09E06.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Brad. How are you, Brad?
Good, thanks, mate.
Absolutely. Good to hear. Haven't had you on this season yet. How have you found the start of the season under Rosenia and the business that we've done, I suppose?
Well, from a league table perspective, pretty happy. And results side of things, it's good to actually have a season where we get off on the right start and almost, if you like, take on the first 5 or 6 games like we are a top half team rather than, nervously looking at how we're putting a squad together or who we're signing next. Whereas at the moment, I've probably ignored a little bit the transfer market and more looked at what we're doing, which has been pleasing.
Yeah, no doubt. And the most pleasing result of all was 2 weekends ago now because of the international break. It was against Leicester where we ran out 1-0 winners. I think I had Logan on the last episode and we were quite confident in this, well, positive in the sense that I think Leicester had sort of flattered to deceive a little bit with their start. They had a series of victories by 1 goal and look, it went pretty well for us in the end with not only the win, but also the first clean sheet of the season as well. How did you find this one?
Well, like you said, the clean sheet, 3 points is great, don't get me wrong, but the clean sheet against Leicester was probably the more surprising, if you like. If ever we were going anywhere this year and going to concede, I would have thought it was there. But probably the most pleasing thing is that, obviously Rosenior's had his chance to really look at how he wants to play and put this team together. And probably the thing that I loved the most about it was, as boring as it sounds, was just the discipline with what we played with. We actually set up really well. We'd done our homework and we actually made, for decent passages of the game, we made Leicester look like that they've never been in the Prem.
Yeah, I found that quite interesting actually watching, particularly in the first half. I think in the second half we sat back a little bit more, but it seemed as if they were trying to press us with almost, I think they almost play with the front four. They play like a 4-2-4 at times with their formation, but it seemed quite easy for our players to actually pass the ball through the press. I know there was a few times where Greaves and Jones were able to play balls almost all the way through to a, I suppose it was a Seri, but Seri then able to play it onto a Delap quite easily. It does come across as a team that's still learning or gelling under their new manager.
Look, it does, and you could see at times that we almost had what I sort of like to call a bit of double coverage in defence. The midfield was trying its hardest to keep to whatever system the manager had put in place for the game, but there was times that we weren't defending in just 1s or 2s. We were defending in 2s and 3s, which looked like we were a little bit probably burnt out in the second half more than anything. We probably relied on too few legs-wise to cover a lot of ground. But look, pleasing the fact that everyone looked like they were happy to be there and really ready to put in a shift.
Yeah, and I guess the concern for me as well was I think it was Jones in the first minute or two, and then Coyle not too long after picking up yellow cards. You sort of felt picking up yellows that early in the piece either spells trouble for a red card or it means that they're going to have to be quite conservative to avoid the second yellow, and that would actually open things up for Leicester. But they were both incredibly disciplined, you used that word earlier, and in their defending, in the way that they marshalled Leicester so effectively. And I think Leicester only had 1 shot on target for the whole game. So it was a really well-rounded defensive display.
Look, it was, and really good as far as, let's say, like our back 6 really didn't look like they were going to give much away. In fact, when we talk about 1 shot on target, I think there was only really one of note in the first half where Leicester looked like they made their way into the box reasonably comfortably. That was it.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we can't go the entire discussion without actually talking about the goal. Delap, 2 goals in his first 5 appearances for us. I think he had a pretty difficult spell last season with Stoke and Preston, but you couple that with his assist against Bristol City as well, and he's really taken to life as a Tiger to start the season.
Look, he has, and I think probably the good thing about the goal is it didn't the goal itself might have come across as a surprise, but technically the finish was good, the build-up was great, and it wasn't like we weren't looking like we were going to score. I know there was a couple of, let's call them more flimsy shots in the first 5-10 minutes from Connolly and so on, when he was probably working his backside off and just had no power in his legs to actually get the shot away. But we didn't look like we were out of place. In fact, for that first 20 to 25 minutes, we looked more likely than they did.
Yeah, no doubt. And
so
I think
it was just good reward to get the finish. That was the key. In past games, we've done that and haven't finished.
Yeah, and I think seeing Delap put out on the right-hand side, you often hear people complain or criticize managers for not having a plan B or not for tweaking tactics depending on the opposition you're coming up against. But I think seeing Delap go out wide, seeing Vinagre come in at left back and switching Greaves back centrally, I think Rossini got his tactics spot on and obviously was well rewarded for it with Delap getting that goal.
Look, definitely, mate. And I think, like you mentioned before, about just even Greaves moving back in, I would normally think, Greaves did have some great games on that left-hand side last year and created for us and so on. But having those two more defensive midfielders sitting in front of him, it was just a wall. They were never going to get through it.
Yeah.
And that's clearly what the game plan was.
Yeah, no doubt. No, we very effectively quelled Leicester in that sense. Look, I'll run through my 3 votes for this game and then I'll grab yours before we move on. So I couldn't go past Delap for the 3 votes. I thought terrific display from him. Obviously capped off with that goal. Seri for the 2 votes, got the assist for Delap. We'll talk a bit more about Seri a bit later when we look back on his time overall as a City player. And then Jones sort of touched on before, but, despite the yellow card, putting in a really outstanding display at the centre half.
Yeah, look, I think you've got to give it to Delap, and not just because of the goal, but like I was saying a moment ago, there was times in that first 15 minutes where he was clearing the ball away from our own box. Not deep in our own box, not in the 6-yard box, but around the 18-yard box. He was motoring everywhere in that first half, and not only to score and play an attacking role, but he defensively really mucked in. And with Seri and Slater getting back, there was times there where Greaves would have thought, how easy is this? I've got these 3 guys running around in front of me. And so definitely the 3 for me. I think you could toss up for the 2 between Seri and Jones. I agree with your sentiments there. I thought Jones put in a hell of a shift, just didn't look totally unfazed by anything. And you know what it's like when you've got Premier League strikers running around. In the back of their mind, they'd be thinking about him all the time and what may need to happen. And, of course, they had a little bit of pace at times, but we didn't look out of whack. But I'm actually going to give 1 to Connolly, and I know he didn't score, and he probably, by his own admission, would say they didn't have the greatest game, but there was times where he was backing into 2 or 3 constantly and held the ball up pretty well. And I think in the second half, when we were playing very deep, he put in a hell of a shift before he came off. So I'm just giving him a token 1.
Fair enough. Look, we were going to talk deadline day signings, but I'm conscious we're a little bit short of time this week, so it will be a shorter episode. What we'll do is we'll touch on those players as they come up in the preview of the Coventry game, but we'll jump on now to Player of the Week, which is Jean-Michel Seri. 42 appearances for us in the league after signing on a free transfer from Fulham last summer. Scored his 1 and only goal on his debut, which is a bit funny to think of. Hasn't managed to get on the score sheet since, but he does have 4 assists as well, which actually surprises me. I thought he might have a couple more than that given his displays, and obviously got the assist on the weekend for Delap. This to me was sort of the signing that signalled Ajun's intent last summer, when you sort of looked at a number of the names we were linked with and you sort of thought, nice to be linked with, but probably not going to sign for City. To have Seri actually sign for us and show the rest of the league how serious Ajun was in turning the club around, it's almost like his worth goes beyond what he does on the pitch. And look, he does plenty on the pitch as well, but I think he's almost like the face. I mean, Tufan you could say as well, but I think Seri is probably one of those players you'd say is the face of the Ajun revolution.
Yeah, look, I think so. And probably the thing that I probably didn't really quite understand until I watched the game again against Leicester is he's got such good head on his shoulders about where to be And I know he'll say, or someone will say he's a holding midfielder, so he should. But there was times where he just looked like he was moving around pretty effortlessly, but his positioning was just faultless. And when you've got a bit of that quality on the ball from a technical perspective, but upstairs in the brain department, he is fantastic. And you'd love to be, especially if we do end up playing with sort of those two holding midfielders with Slater, the both of them really complement each other really well. And I think in a way that the two central defenders would say with him in front of us, he makes it 10 times easier for us. He just seems to have so much time.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, look, I think he's 31 now. I think there's 1 year on his deal left after this season. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him next season, whether we look to phase him out, or, if he's still showing this sort of form, why he couldn't extend his contract and actually play on a bit further. And we'll talk about, Morton signing from Liverpool in a second, and as a sort of player who potentially comes in as I guess maybe not a replacement, but as an understudy to Seri. But yeah, look, it will be interesting to see what Seri's future is over the next, I suppose, 18 months in the side. But we'll talk about that Coventry game now, who we play this Saturday morning, our time, Friday night over in the UK. I don't think it's televised in the sense that it's not on Sky. So I think it means we're watching this through Tigers Plus rather than through beIN Sports, which is the provider down here. Which actually might be better for some people, given that beIN's no longer on Foxtel. Obviously took the 4 points off them last season with the 3-2 win where Oscar got his hat-trick, and a 1-1 draw as well. Interestingly, I suppose, in terms of players, they have signed Haji Wright, who was a target for us last season. So I think it's almost written in the stars that he'll score a goal against us, as these things tend to go. But I guess on our side, we've got a few exciting signings who could potentially come into the team as well, in Jaden Fellajean, who signed on deadline day, Tyler Morton, as discussed, as the sort of central midfielder from Liverpool, who might look, I mean, we didn't touch on him in the review of the Leicester game, but I think Adama Traore is probably having a tough start to the season for us, and whether he drops out of the side so that Twine could go more central and Fellajean play on the wing, or whether, Slater gets pushed into that role and Morton comes in at central midfield. I'm not too sure, but I guess, how do you see the lineups for this one?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one because you've just put in a good shift and lineup, or tactically, we were brilliant. The prep that went into that game. Obviously, the manager's job with his staff is obviously lining up against the opposition we've got. The thing that I find interesting this week is, Coventry have been pretty hit and miss, but they're a team really that, with all due respect, we should be able to beat if we're going to be that top half team. And the one thing that I noticed is that before the weekend, they've sort of only really, I think Middlesbrough, they gave Middlesbrough a bit of a flogging, but they've sort of only been sort of thereabouts against everyone.
Everyone's giving Middlesbrough a flogging this season.
Well, I mean, it's good to see, isn't it, really? But primarily it's more the fact that, multiple goals is what's going to win games. And obviously, yep, sure, we've just won 1-0, and that's easy to say against Leicester that it's a great result. But I just want to see us actually try and open them up a bit. I think Coventry are really vulnerable defensively, and that's shown in the games that they've played, not just because of the Watford game last time round, but more so the fact that nearly every game they've been involved with, they've looked shaky. I haven't seen all of them, but I have watched a couple of them now, especially you go back and look at the Swansea game. It was a 1-1 draw, but statistically, they were never really in it. They probably would say they were, but I just think most of the time when you're looking through these results, a 1-1 draw just looks like, a boring old 1-1 draw. But I don't think Coventry have actually got much of a defensive mindset to their game plan at all. And I think they're going to try and find a way just to say, well, we'll have more shots than you and we'll win. But against us, we've probably got one of the best, if not back 3 or 4s, back 6s in the comp. I really believe the way we lined up against Leicester, it was no fluke that we made them look second rate attackingly.
And it's wild to think that the majority of that was our back 4 or 5 in League One.
Yeah, look, I think maybe it could be the benefit of an off season, and I don't really know from a back office perspective whether they decided to to look more closely at it. But even the way we lined up in the Leicester game, I was still a little bit surprised. Like you said, Greaves tucking in and all these sorts of things, but it just worked. Everything about the whole way we put together. I don't know whether it's because we had the amber shorts on or what it was, but we just looked like we were really defending as almost like a six. And it was really good to watch, because if we can do that against the good teams, we've got the firepower to open these non-Leicester type teams up. And that's really how we're probably going to get into the playoffs, or if not, get closer to the Holy Grail, is that we've got to be able to grind results out and get people on the counter.
Yeah. And look, as a game at home as well, I think I saw on the 3rd of September, we tweeted out that we'd already sold 19,000 tickets. So no doubt that's closer to 21, 22,000 by this stage. You really want to be turning the MKM Stadium into a fortress and a cauldron of noise for the team. I don't know if two fans actually fit for this one. Obviously dropped out of that game against Leicester, has, scored 4 goals in as many games already this season. So he's probably one that you could argue comes back into the team, perhaps for Connolly to sort of take him back to being that impact player off the bench. Look at this comment from Cameron in the chat. We've been generally defensively solid under Rosie. The only times we concede is when there's miscommunication with the pass back. Just need the forwards to unlock opposing defenses. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like you sort of look at it, it's really just moments in games where the defense has a bit of a lapse, and it's, by comparison, we're getting, I think I saw some stat that we've actually got the highest percentage of on-target shots, of total shots in the league, which is, I mean, it's a good thing in a sense, but it also, I suppose, means, well, maybe we should be scoring a couple more goals as well. So, look, I think you're right. I think Coventry at home is a game that if we really want to have the league stand up and take notice of us, we need to be sort of putting away for the 3 points. They've only got the 1 win for the season so far, 1 win and 3 draws to start the season. So a bit of a shaky start to the season for them. I think personally, I would shift Traore out, Twine central, because I think he's better from a central position, and maybe give Philogene a start. I know there was some issues with Philogene's registrations, but I think that's all been resolved now. So I'd love to see him given a crack from the start. And look, if not, maybe it's a Kilo or a Connolly plays that wider role for us. But I think that would be just about my only change, unless two fans fit, and maybe he comes in as well. But yeah, I think that's how I'd see it. What's your sense for a score prediction for this one?
Look, I think we'll probably beat them 2-1. I think we've got the firepower to score a couple. Like I said, I don't think, forget the Watford game, Coventry probably, I don't know where they'd actually sit on the table for goals against, but I do believe their biggest weakness is their defence. And one of our strengths last week was obviously our defence. So I think we could probably maybe concede 1 only because we're scoring some down the other end. So I think 2-1's probably where I would sit, mate.
Yeah, Joe's saying XG wasn't good last game, needs some quality chances. I think that's right. I think game state comes into it a little bit last game, where once we took that lead, we were very much intent on just holding on to that lead and seeing the game out. So probably went back into our shells a little bit. But I think at home, hopefully we'll go for the jugular a bit more. I'll probably join you in backing a 2-1 win. I think, the way we seem to be this season, we'll probably concede 1 at some stage, but hopefully can go 1 better than them on the score sheet. But look, I think that about rounds it up. I know we had a bit shorter time this week. I don't know if you had any closing thoughts, Brad?
No, look, I think probably the pleasing thing about the Leicester game, just to go back on it, was that we know that we've got, look, we know the spine of our squad is as good as anyone's. It's the edges of that spine that we have to chop and change according to injuries or makeshift. The thing that probably pleased me the most, and I know I saw on here that Cameron had mentioned that we're generally defensive under Rosie, or solid, sorry, not defensive, but we look solid, is that I think there was times last year where solid was sort of when we played the same back four or the same centre halves, or we had to have some sort of similarity there each week to show that. And then there was weeks where we made one change somewhere due to injury in that back four or back six, and we looked a different team. Whereas I love the fact that the way we lined up against Leicester showed real intent of what this squad can do, and they backed them in. And I think that's probably going to be the key. We didn't really play last year with top half confidence. Whereas the Leicester game may just give us, even if it's 5%, it may start letting the players believe that we are genuinely, if not even top half, probably a top 10 squad. And with the right little sprinkle of investment that we've seen so far, we've now got those edges sorted, or will work better with them over the rest of the season. So I'm pretty happy. I'm still saying don't be too optimistic yet, because it's a long season. But I do like the fact that we haven't hit our straps. We haven't got a squad that is really gelling because it's got, those newer players in it. But we've got a hell of a squad.
Absolutely. It's exciting times under Rosie, and you just sort of think if and when this all starts to click and we start to, put it all together, you get in the clean sheets and the goals up the other end, that makes us a pretty formidable force in the league. And so it's going to be interesting this week. We've got Leeds midweek next week, Thursday morning. So we'll be back to cover the preview to that game this time next week, and review the Coventry game, of course, as well. But until next time, look, thanks for joining me for this one, Brad.
Thanks for having me, mate.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening in. Yeah, it was a shorter episode this week, but we'll be back next week to go into detail on those games. So until next time, come on, City.